Before the war, women would be found with jobs such as secretaries, clerks, nurses, stay-at-home moms, and teachers. As World War II came about and men were enlisting and being drafted into the military, the roles reversed. The jobs that had been filled by men before were open and needing workers. These jobs tended to be more labor-intensive and with higher expectations, while women were still working at home and taking care of their children. They were taking up jobs in factories as well.
The loss of jobs was a stark contrast to the problems of women being fired for being married during the Great Depression. Before the war, only 27% of women were working outside of the home, but after that, there were 37%. 1 in 4 women were working as a result of the war. These women took over other traditionally male-oriented jobs during the war, such as repairing airplanes, working as laboratory technicians, rigging parachutes, serving as radio operators, flying military aircraft across the country, test flying newly repaired planes, and working as code breakers. Anne Cara Christie is a prime example of trailblazing women in the workforce at the time. When the war began, she was working in Arlington, Virginia under tight government security on the site of a former school for girls. She had been recruited from her college when the Signal Intelligence Service called and asked for recommendations of women to work from the cryptology and cryptography unit. After some time working for them, they began to realize her abilities at code breaking. She was encouraged to move into the National Security Agency to work. She continued her work all throughout the war, deciphering many messages that were intercepted from the Japanese military. She represents the woman who dropped everything in their everyday life of societal oppression to move up in the world. She made a name for herself, and when the war drew to a close, she ended her work with them because of societal pressures to go back to a more female-dominated job at the time. She soon got bored and returned to her work for the government. She continued to work there for another 40 years and has become the highest-ranked and most honored woman of the codebreakers.
This cryptological.
Well, it was mysteriously done, I think. I believe that the Signal Intelligence Service sent out an all-point search of women's colleges, saying that they were seeking people to work in cryptology, and I believe they asked for recommendations. At least the dean of Russell Sage apparently nominated me and 2 other people who were friends of mine as.
While some jobs required more mentally taxing work, other women pursued more physically demanding professions. Violet's story of becoming an icon for aspiring military women started when she enlisted in the Women's Army Corps. Before that, she was working in state civil service and would never have considered enrolling had her best friend not suggested that she apply for the WAC. Her application ended up being accepted, and she soon became the second commanding officer. She went on to serve in Fort Huacha, Arizona, that went overseas. Her unit was the first all-African-American women unit to serve overseas in England and France. Violet left the Corps as a captain and left as an independent female leader. Violet believes her experience in the WAP changed her from being unconfident to a strong and determined person, and was one of the strongest women to serve in World War II. She is a strong symbol of how women went from stereotypical responsibilities of women back in the 40s to an independent leader just as capable of the responsibilities that men had in World War II. She is a great example of how women advanced in the employment position within society despite the oppression and resistance that women received when securing more responsibilities in jobs they had never had before. In Violet's case, becoming a strong leader in the WAC.
Another physically demanding job from a first-hand perspective is from the Riveter herself, Miss May Cryer. May Cryer was known as one of the most famous Rosie the Riveters that has come out of World War II. She was just fresh out of high school when she left North Dakota to go work in Washington. At Boeing Aircraft during World War II, she was one of the servicewomen who worked on airplanes, specifically B-12s and B-29s. She worked as a servicewoman for around 2 years. After the war ended, her job was taken and eventually given back to the men who had left for war. But she continued her efforts to get the women who served in war more recognition. This is a stellar case of how women's involvement in the war led to the improvement of their treatment in the home front. This exemplified how women were not only able to take over jobs of men, but specifically in the roles of STEM, which has been known to be very prejudiced against women in the past.
All of our boys enlisted immediately. As soon as the war was declared, they all went and enlisted. And of course, when the boys left, the girls wanted to go too. They left. We started, bit by bit, we started going west to the, we went like I worked at Boeing. My sister and I and our girlfriend thought, well, let's go out west for the summer. That ought to be fun. And that's what we did, but we loved it, and we stayed. And we all became Rosie Riveters at Boeing in Seattle.
The various jobs that women took up as a result of World War II changed how they were seen as having capabilities to work beyond the caregiver who stayed home and took care of the family. While some people protested women stepping into higher roles and showing their capabilities, they persisted anyway and gained more respect as a result. Without the push of World War II to get women working, they might still be undermined in a society today.